Hi everyone, welcome back to Collective Histories. For this episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I like tier lists, I like watching tier lists. Let's do a tier list, and since we've been covering the prime ministers of the 20th century, plus Gordon Brown in recent weeks, let's do one for the prime ministers. So, this looks like it's been made in no particular order. Congratulations to the person who made it. You could have put them in order, would have been very helpful, especially with some of those older photos. But we're going to give it a go. And we're going to be including some of the modern prime ministers, just to add a little bit of spice to this tier list meal we're making. Let's make it extra picante. Okay, so Theresa May is first. Theresa May, where do we begin? So if I remember correctly, Theresa May was prime minister between 2016 and 2019. Yes, 2016, 2019. She took over from David Cameron, who had to step down over the Brexit result. And despite being a Remainer herself, she positioned herself as a very hardline Brexiteer. She was constantly teasing a no-deal Brexit, or at the very least a hard Brexit. And yeah, this kind of dominated her entire premiership. I mean, the subject of Brexit was the dominant political discourse at the time. And yeah, she really wanted to go for this hard Brexit to make her look as though she is a Brexiteer of some kind. We all knew the truth. She wasn't. But she certainly tried to be. So, Theresa May, what else did she do? I mean, Grenfell happened during this time, and I remember her response being particularly bad. So that's not good. Her Brexit position, not good. She also had the general election result of 2017. I mean, she didn't need to call the snap election. It's respectable in some ways that she did, because she was just trying to gain a mandate. After all, she was an unelected prime minister taking over from David Cameron. But it ended in humiliation because she lost the Conservative majority, and it empowered Jeremy Corbyn, at least for 2 years. So, what did she do that was good? Did she do anything that was good? I don't think she did. So, Theresa May, I think she belongs in the very bad category. She had 3 years, she had plenty of time to do something, and she didn't really achieve much that I can think of. I'm trying not to be too biased as well. For those who have watched my videos, you can probably guess some of my political leanings. I'm not a conservative, and I'm trying to be fair. Some of the Conservatives on this list will rank pretty high, but Theresa May can't. She's very bad. I'm putting her very bad. Sorry, Theresa May. It's like she's running through a field of wheat of bad. Okay, next we have what looks like Alec Douglas Home. Alec Douglas Home, what did he do? Oh, geez, yeah. So he was Prime Minister between, let me just check my notes here, 1963 and 1964. And he didn't have much time to do anything. He was Prime Minister for a very short period. I think it was 365 days, if I remember correctly. Didn't get to do much. He took over from Harold Macmillan, who had to step down. And, yeah, didn't do too good. But he didn't have time to do anything else. So I think it's only fair, in the spirit of fairity, that we put him in the don't know category. There we go. That's where you belong, my friend. Okay, next. Okay, having looked, I can now attest to this man, in fact, being Anthony Eden. So Anthony Eden, also not Prime Minister for a very long amount of time, but he did have the notable, infamous feat. And consider he was only Prime Minister between 1955 and 1957, and this man had the audacity to instigate the Suez Canal crisis, which not only humiliated Britain and end the United Kingdom as a global superpower, and France also suffered because of this, it also rendered him a failure, a failed prime minister, in fact. And it's kind of a shame, because Anthony Eden is well known for also being a hero of the First World War. He was a good man. He saved a man's life, he got the military cross, he did some good. But this was not good. The Suez Canal crisis was terrible. It was just an opportunity for him to re-establish Britain as a global superpower, and it wasn't. It just couldn't compete at the level of the United States and the Soviet Union. So Anthony Eden, I'm afraid, deserves to go into the very bad category, because this is one of the biggest mistakes of British political history. So I'm sorry, Eden. It's where you go, my friend. I tried. I tried to save you. I couldn't. This is where you go. And then next we have Bonar Law, who was Prime Minister between 1922 and 1923 for a mere 210 days. He became the Prime Minister after winning the general election against David Lloyd George, and he didn't last long, not because of scandal or anything, he just got throat cancer, I believe. So I think it's only fair we give this man the don't know category. He wasn't Prime Minister long enough to achieve anything of note. He wasn't Prime Minister long enough to achieve anything of notoriety. He just existed. So he's forever in the don't know category. He could have been good, he could have been bad. We don't know. Okay, speaking of good and bad, Boris Johnson, jeez. So Prime Minister between 2019 and 2022. His early premiership was, well, really just the first few months of his premiership, was dominated by Brexit, which he was a campaigner for, of course. He took over Theresa May. His plan was to bring in the hard Brexit. And, I mean, Brexit got done, I guess. That's a victory for Boris Johnson. It's worth mentioning that he wasn't initially a Brexiteer. He only made himself as such because he thought he would win. Originally, he wrote an article in favor of remaining, so he's just a charlatan, isn't he? And then in 2020 onwards, his premiership was dominated by the subject of COVID. His response to COVID wasn't particularly great, and as we now know, most of that time was spent partying. He was partying up and Downing Street with all of his Etonian buddies, so kind of difficult to place Boris Johnson. He had 3 years, didn't achieve too much. Again, not all of it his fault because COVID was going on. He had the big 2019 general election victory, which brought a new Conservative majority and ended the threat of socialism from Jeremy Corbyn. So that's a win for him. I'm going to put Boris Johnson... I mean, if you include Partygate, and it's still ongoing, like the investigation is still ongoing, it's very bad. Very bad. But, I'm putting him very bad. I'm thinking of Peppa Pig World as well, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't seen Peppa Pig World, his Peppa Pig World speech, you need to do so. Very bad stuff. And, yeah, he's going very bad. I don't care what he thinks. Sorry, Boris Johnson. Okay, Clement Attlee. Clement Attlee was Prime Minister between 1945 and 1951. But he was also kind of co-Prime Minister of Winston Churchill throughout the Second World War. He was managing Britain at home. Churchill was managing the war effort, so very important figure in political history. And that's just for the war stuff. I mean, as Prime Minister, he achieved some notable feats. The formation of the NHS, the National Health Service. There was lots of social reforms, the establishment of the welfare state, housing prices low. He did a lot of good. He's often ranked within the top 1 or 2 prime ministers in British history too, so very good man. Yeah, I'm going to put Clement Attlee in the very good category, and partly influenced by bias, but also history backs me up on this one. He's always ranked this high. I feel as though he deserves to be up there. He was also a very good man, but it's also worth mentioning he did make some mistakes. We can't avoid the mistakes. The partition of India, as we discussed in our video on the biggest mistakes of the prime ministers, was a terrible mistake. He should have appointed someone who knew India, who had been to India, and maybe the situation would have been better. So that's on Attlee. That's almost enough to bring him down to good, in my opinion. But domestic policy was pretty damn good. So, yeah, he belongs in the very good category. I know the NHS isn't entirely attributable to him, because that was Nye Bevan. It was his creation, mostly. But it was in Attlee's government, so Attlee, very good. Okay, next, my main man, my fellow Cumro, the Welshman, David Lloyd George, sometimes nicknamed the Welsh Wizard. The last Liberal Prime Minister, interesting. He was pretty left-wing, to be honest. I mean, some of his policies are not. He himself probably wasn't, but he was very much aware of the growing threat of Labour, and he was trying to prevent their growth. So he kind of moved the Liberal Party more towards the left, but he failed. He failed. Labour did succeed the Liberals on that, but that's not something we can really blame on Lloyd George too much. He was a very polarizing figure, but also a very successful one. During World War One, his leadership, he took over in 1916 after the unceremonious step down of H.H. Asquith, who failed to establish a war government. Lloyd George did it very fast. He did lots of social reforms. He had the people's budget. He did a lot of good. Lloyd George did a lot of good, and I'm not biased towards him because he's Welsh and because we share a name. I don't have too much loyalty to him in reality, but I think history would place him very high. He's one of the better prime ministers, certainly one of the more noteworthy prime ministers. Again, downside to him was that he became rather buddy-buddy with Adolf Hitler, and they were both talking to each other very much, and there were rumors, and it's not even a rumor really, it's pretty established at this point, that Adolf Hitler wanted to appoint David Lloyd George the Prime Minister of a puppet UK government should he succeed in invading Britain with Operation Sea Lion. Thankfully, it didn't happen. So yeah, Lloyd George, I think he belongs very high. Very high. I mean, if the Operation Sea Lion stuff happened, he'd be in the very bad category because he'd be a traitor. But it didn't happen. We don't know entirely the circumstances surrounding it. We can't put him there on the basis of a rumor with a lot of facts behind it. But I think he belongs in the good category. I might even put him in the very good category. We'll have to review this. Okay, quick tea break, everyone. Masala chai. Okay. Next we have David Cameron. So David Cameron was the Prime Minister between 2010 and 2016. He holds the distinction of being the Prime Minister who was Prime Minister when I was first able to vote. 2015 general election was my first general election. I don't like him, personally. I feel like the austerity measures were unnecessary. They were unnecessarily cruel. And his premiership is often seen as one which favoured the wealthy as opposed to the poor. Typical view of an Etonian, I know, but it's how I feel. It's how many feel. He did some good, like he was pretty good on social policy. LGBTQ plus people benefited from his premiership in some ways. Not all, but in some. He was pro-Europe, of course. It's why he lost the premiership. I mean, he had to stand down after the Brexit result went against him. For him, a big victory in that he was on the side of the Unionists during the Scottish independence election of 2014, and of course, the Unionists won, so a big victory for David Cameron. He won the 2015 general election with a small majority. He won the 2010 general election and went into coalition with Liberal Democrats. More of a loss for Labour than a win for the Conservatives, that one. I can't put him in the very bad category. I would like to, trust me. If it was my personal opinion, he'd be in the very bad category. He'd be in the worst category. But I've got to be fair, I should say. Not biased. That'd be bad. Got to be fair. And if I'm being fair to David Cameron, I would probably put him in bad rather than very bad, simply because there was some good social reforms. Education, I'm an RE teacher, in case you didn't know, and hated... I mean, I wasn't teaching at the time, but the teachers I know hate his reforms under the Education Secretary, who I believe was Michael Gove. A lot of people hate those. Ofsted especially grew enormously. Yeah, I'd put him bad, and that's me being nice to him. I don't want to put him very bad. I would like to, but I can't. Sorry, David Cameron. Okay, Ted Heath. Ted Heath is an interesting one. He's kind of disliked by the older generation of Welsh people that I know, my parents. And I've read into Ted Heath. I don't dislike him. I think he was more honourable than most of the modern Conservatives. People will disagree with me, of course, and contemporaries of Heath might disagree with me. I don't dislike him. I think his pro-European stance was admirable at the time. I know socialists are going to be angry with me over that, but it's how I feel. Europe was the sixth man of Europe. He recognized it. He wanted to change it. So on that, pretty good. He didn't have too many problems, in my opinion. I've looked into him a little bit. He's one of the ones I don't know as much about, I'll admit. There could be more that I've not read about. But ultimately, I don't think he was bad. And yeah, I'm going to put Ted Heath in the neutral category. I don't think he was awful. Okay, Gordon Brown. What can be said about Gordon Brown? So Gordon Brown, Prime Minister between 2007 and 2010. He's the only Prime Minister on this list who I've met. I have a book signed by Gordon Brown. Good man, probably one of the most intelligent Prime Ministers on this list, absolutely. Didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. I believe he went to Edinburgh. From a very young age, was seen to be the future of the Labour Party. He was kind of usurped in that by Tony Blair. And even when they were sort of co-prime ministers together, Brown was seen as the substance to Blair's style. As Chancellor, one of the most powerful chancellors the country's ever had. He nicknamed the Iron Chancellor. But as Prime Minister between 2007 and 2010, premiership was not good. So he should have called a snap general election early. He didn't. This allowed Cameron and the Conservatives to jump onto the fact that he was running away from the face of victory. Clever on their part, I'll admit. He never called that general election, and it backfired on him enormously. His entire premiership was seen as sad and tired, like New Labour had run out of ideas, and Brown himself had run out of ideas because he was Chancellor for so long. Not particularly great. There was also the election campaign, which had the infamous bigoted woman comment. Not good. She might have been bigoted. And yeah, his premiership was also dominated by the global financial crash, which is wrongly attributed to him. But even so, it happened. It was his premiership. And yeah, he did decent in trying to mitigate that. He took a leading role in the world. He was seen as very intelligent on the economy. But ultimately, it's a failed premiership. And I hate to say it because he's probably my favorite person on this list. So, again, I have to be unbiased. And if some of these others are in bad and very bad, he kind of has to go there too. He didn't do as much as he would have liked. I'm going to put Gordon Brown, and this pains me, next to David Cameron in the bad category. Okay, Harold Macmillan, Prime Minister between 1957 and 1963, And yeah, his premiership was seen as an interesting one. This was occurring during the decolonization phase. I put his greatest achievement as the Winds of Change speech, which he gave about African countries becoming independent and gaining the ability to self-determine. I think this was good. I think it was a great speech. I think it was admirable. And yeah, his period is seen as an interesting one. He was also the friend of John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's a good book about that, written by, is it McNamara? I can't remember the name. I'll find out what that's called. And yeah, he was a good man on this. I don't dislike him. I know people do. My parents probably dislike him. But I think he was okay. I don't have a problem with him. I think he was relatively principled. I know the Profono scandal happened during this time, but wasn't his fault, technically. I mean, the handling of it was him, yes, but he's not the instigator of it. So I'm going to put him in the neutral category next to Ted Heath. Okay, Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson is an interesting one. He was Prime Minister twice, between 64 and 70, and between 74 and 76. The second premiership ended prematurely due to, I believe, the early signs of dementia. Could be wrong on that. It was definitely a health condition. And Wilson is an interesting choice. As a teacher, I quite like him. His education reforms were ahead of their time. He recognized the point of modernizing Britain. He was pretty good at this. I think he was opposed to joining Europe, which is why he was a competitor for Ted Heath, I guess. This was one of the defining issues of the day. He was pretty good on LGBTQ plus rights, ahead of his time on that. Yeah, he's often seen as a very left-wing prime minister, but he's kind of not. He's kind of the precursor to Blair in some ways. He wasn't as left-wing as people make him out to be, which is why he was constantly butting heads with the Bennites and Tony Benn himself. Harold Wilson, I like him. I'm probably going to put him in the good category. Yeah, I think he belongs in the good category. I'm going to put him there. Oh, geez, I just saw who's next. Okay. Next up, we have James Callaghan, who, if you saw my videos, is not my favourite Prime Minister. He's probably my least favourite Labour Prime Minister, and that says a lot. He was a Prime Minister between 76 and 79. He was kind of un-Labourish because he was constantly batting heads with the unions. There was the Winters of Discontent, which damaged his premiership to the point where Margaret Thatcher stormed to a victory in 79. Yeah, I don't like James Callaghan all that much, I'll be honest with you. He succeeded Wilson, kind of different to Wilson in some ways. Certainly not as likeable for me. I'm going to put Callaghan in the bad category. Okay, John Major, who was the Prime Minister between 1990 and 1997. And he was the Prime Minister when I was born, though I don't remember him. Yeah, so he was the successor to Thatcher, kind of a successor of Thatcherism in many ways. Kind of similar to Brown in the sense that Thatcherism was kind of tired at this point. They've kind of done everything they wanted to do. Same with Blairism and Brownism. Like, it has been done. There was nothing left to do. Same thing for Major. Had a big victory in the 1992 general election. He was not expected to win that. That was a big surprise. And yeah, but after that, it was just constant sleaze. And I feel like it was the right time for Blair to rise to power, to rise to the front line of politics, because he was seen as young and fresh and different to Major, who was kind of seen as just this continuation of Thatcherism. John Major, not a big fan. I don't think he did all that much in the amount of time he had. He had 7 years. There's a lot he could have done in that time. But if people ask you to name an achievement of John Major, what can you really say? There's not an awful lot. I'm going to put John Major in the bad category. And I'm only putting him there and not the very bad category because there's nothing either really that stands out as typically very bad. I mean, yeah, just bad. Okay, here comes the big one. Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher is the most polarizing person on this list, of course. She was Prime Minister between 1979 and 1990, which is a very long time. Pretty unheard of. I don't think anyone else in this list was Prime Minister for that amount of time. Certainly not continuous. She had a lot of things. The poll tax, terrible policy. She took milk away from school children, terrible. Like, what did it achieve? Like, what was she just hoping to get by that? A little bit extra money in the economy, but at the expense of being nicknamed Thatcher Milk Snatcher. Why? You know, she just has this reputation as being very cruel, and I feel like she is, or was. Falklands War was a big victory for her. Gotta give her that. Not necessarily something I know an awful lot about. I don't know if I agree with it or not, but it happened. She won. It was a victory for her. She went to war with the miners, the striking miners. Victory for her, but to what expense? I mean, not a good time. Arthur Scargill, rest his soul. Although he's still alive, now that I think about it. That happened. What else was there? There's loads of stuff for Margaret Thatcher. And for me, like, my politics, like I said, I've got biases. For me, I can try to sympathize with some of these conservative prime ministers, although none of them are in the good category yet. But Thatcher, I can't. Like, she just seems cruel. And I don't like her, of course. I've made this perfectly clear. Probably my least favourite Prime Minister in the history of Britain. And that says a lot, considering I'm looking right at Boris Johnson's face. Thatcher... I mean, I can't deny that she was transformative. I can't deny that Thatcherism to this day is still, like, it's influenced the Conservative Party. It went from a small c Conservative Party to a free markets party that it is now, rather. She changed it. She was the first female Prime Minister, very respectable feat. People never would have believed that the first female Prime Minister would be from the Conservative Party, just because of the way the party was, but she did it. You have to admire it. But ultimately, just not a nice Prime Minister. Really not nice. And, I mean, I included a clip in one video where she says how she supports the death penalty if someone is doing horrible things to children. But yeah, she was also good friends with Jimmy Savile. And many people knew what Jimmy Savile was up to. So many bad things about her. For Margaret Thatcher... I would love to put her in the very bad category. I would love to. But at the same time, I have to do this with a clear mind. And there's a lot of bad stuff for me. I mean, people clearly liked it because they kept voting her. Not sure why. People in Wales hate her. People in Scotland hate her. The north of England mostly dislikes her. Mostly hates her in some parts. She's a very polarizing figure, and it's kind of hard to place her. If I place her in the very bad, that's kind of just not acknowledging all of her achievements. First female Prime Minister, how many general elections did she win? 2 or 3? 11 years as Prime Minister. And Thatcherism dominated the discourse, still does to this day. I have to put her, and I hate to do this. I'm sorry, my friends. Ladies, gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, I'm sorry, but she's going in the good category, and I would really rather not do this, but I have to. Okay, just trying to look away. Oh, jeez. Okay, so next we have Neville Chamberlain. You know, Neville Chamberlain, 1937 to 1940 as Prime Minister, I believe. What do we remember him for? Appeased Hitler. Did it go good? No. But, like I said in the achievement victory, was it really a good thing? Did it buy Britain time? Was he aware that Hitler was definitely going to invade and a war was going to happen? Was this just necessary to rearm? Maybe. But we don't know for sure. And we have to judge him on this issue because there's not a whole lot else. This was the dominant issue of the day. You've got to put him very bad. You got to put him very bad. There's no other way to do it. I mean, it was very bad. You got to admire Churchill. He saw what was coming, and he had a better approach. Okay. Ramsay MacDonald. Tragic hero, in my opinion. Ramsay MacDonald, 24 to 24, the first premiership, not long, and then 29 to 35. Holds the distinction of being the first Labour Prime Minister. He succeeded with making Labour the number 2 party ahead of the Liberals, who had been a dominant party for a long time. But he also made sure they never came to power again, so well done to Ramsay MacDonald. Mostly remembered for going into an alliance with the Conservatives. Big no-no for a Labour leader, I have to say. He was part of the founding of the Labour Party too, I believe, with Keir Hardie and a couple of others. I think there was 4 of them. I could be wrong. Good man. I think he was a good man. He recognised Britain needed changing. He was a moderniser. He was a socialist. He maybe distanced himself from it over time. Either way, I have to say, Ramsay MacDonald wasn't as bad as he's made out to be, and his premiership was remembered mostly for this thing where he went into power with the Tories. Was it necessary? Was it not? I don't know. Would I like to judge him on it? Yes. But ultimately, I don't think he was a bad man, and he achieved some good. As I've mentioned, check out the video on his achievements. He did some good. I don't think he was terrible. He was a modernizer. I want to put him in the neutral category. I'm going to put him neutral. Okay. Next, it looks like we have Stanley Baldwin, I think. Yes, definitely Stanley Baldwin. So 23 to 24, first premiership, not long, but then he did 24 to 29 and 35 to 37. He was a well-liked prime minister, which goes without saying. He was elected to prime minister 3 times, 2 different generations as well. Respectable. I know Neville Chamberlain gets the blame for the appeasement of Hitler, but Stanley Baldwin was one of the instigators of this too. So it's not all attributable to Neville Chamberlain. I'm sure somewhere Stanley Baldwin was thinking, oh, thank God that wasn't me who got that treatment. So you kind of have to give him some of the blame too. He was pretty good. He wasn't a bad Conservative Prime Minister. In fact, he's probably one of my preferred ones. He wasn't completely Thatcher. Let's put it that way. I've got to put him in the good category. He didn't do anything terrible. And I'm trying to think. No, I think he's a good Prime Minister. I really do. Get in there, Stanley Baldwin. Okay. Second to last, Tony Blair. 1997 to 2007. Almost as long as Thatcher. He probably could have been if it wasn't for Gordon Brown. Yeah, I mean, he won the 2005 general election. He could have gone on longer if he wanted to. So, yeah, Tony Blair. What can be said about Tony Blair that hasn't already been said? For me, I think his domestic policies were pretty good. Introduction of the minimum wage, good thing. Lowest waiting times in the NHS, very good thing. But he was also kind of anti-union, bad thing, especially for a Labour leader. He reformed Labour into New Labour, which was more of a small c conservative version of the Labour Party. He kind of modernised Britain on the global stage. People respected Britain more during his premiership, I think. Like, there was a new wave of cool Britannia, as they say. He was good friends with both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. The former for better, the latter for the worse. The Iraq War will always define Tony Blair's legacy. It's inevitable. And, you know, if we're ranking him on the Iraq War, he goes very bad, in my opinion. If we're ranking him on domestic policy, I would probably put him good to very good. So I guess we could put him in the middle, go neutral. But I think he's so polarizing, you have to put him on one side. You need to make a stand. And which side of the Tony Blair fence will I be on? Well, I've decided he's going into the good category. And this will be controversial to many. I know. And like I said, Iraq War, terrible. One of the biggest mistakes. It's up there with the Suez Canal crisis for me. But I'm going to go on domestic policy, as I have done for many of these others, and I'm going to put him good. Okay, last but certainly not least is Winston Churchill. Whew. Okay, Winston Churchill. So Prime Minister between 40 and 45, and then between 51 and 55, I think. And Winston Churchill, I mean, he's up there with Thatcher and Blair as probably the 3 most polarizing. But Winston Churchill, unlike these two, has the big notable achievement of winning the Second World War. His leadership during that, chef's kiss, flawless. Maybe a few tactical and strategic errors, but there was always going to be. You know, this was a war against some of the toughest armies and toughest generals and leaders. He was always going to have some mistakes. And he had made mistakes in the past. Gallipoli. Look at Gallipoli. A lot of that's attributable to Winston Churchill. And it led to a long period in the political wilderness for him. And yeah, he still bounced back, warned of Hitler, came back as a conservative after having been a liberal originally. And yeah, I mean, the rest is history, as they say. As a Welsh person, don't like him too much. You can read about what he thought about the Welsh, and particularly the Welsh miners. Has a bad reputation in Wales to this day among some. Unionists will, of course, love him. But you have to, like, if everyone's going to be defined on their biggest thing, his is the Second World War. He won it. And what can you say? I think he belongs in the very good category on the basis of that. Now, there are also terrible things which he did. Don't get me wrong. Like I said in the worst mistakes video, there was the awful Bengal famine, which was up there with the Iraq War. Probably the worst thing to have been done by any prime minister. Led to the deaths of millions. And it depends on how much you attribute that to Winston Churchill. I personally do. And if I was ranking him on that, he'd be very bad. But, see, that could bring him from very good down. Am I going to rank him on the Second World War? I think I should, but with a asterisk next to his name saying that he could also be a lot lower because of Bengal and Welsh miners and so many other things. But World War II, you have to give to him. So, and that concludes this tier list. This took a while. Jeez, this is a long, lengthy process, and it's very stressful. So, is there anyone that I want to change? No, I'm going to keep like this. I went with my gut reaction. I'm sticking with it. Okay. If you want more content from Collective Histories, please follow us on facebook.com/Collective Histories page. Oh, wait, you should subscribe to us first, too. That's very important. We've been stuck on 199 subscribers the last 2 days. It's stressing me out. So then we have Instagram at instagram.com/The Collective Histories. And we have Twitter/X at twitter.com/Collective Histo. And then we have Buy Me a Coffee. If you really want to go the extra mile and support us, I'm very thirsty, especially after recording this nearly 40-minute video. Please buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Collective Histories. And that's it. I hope you have a lovely weekend. We'll be back on Monday for the next video. Probably more of our traditional content. This was a fun one to do for today. We'll do more in the future, I'm sure. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely weekend. See you on Monday. Goodbye!